This is Mandatory Listening. I'm your host, Kent Mann. Each week, we sit down over a cup of coffee and discuss interesting topics in the world of the customer experience. Welcome back to Mandatory Listening. This is Kent Mann, and I'm joined today by someone who has not been on the podcast in quite a while, Hank Mann. How are you doing, Hank?
I'm doing pretty well. Excited to be back.
Yeah, and we're recording in the afternoon, so everything's all messed up. There's no coffee involved. We're right after lunch, so if we fall asleep, I'm going to go ahead and apologize. You know, you go to your iTunes and notice a 4-hour-long podcast, and most of it's just silent. That means we fell asleep.
Yeah, someone needs to wake us.
Yeah, exactly. So, Hank, we want to get into a topic about teaching in general. But first, I wanted to ask, you are, out of everyone that I know, you are the biggest movie buff. You go see the most movies. Your girlfriend always has movies up on the queue. Like we're going in, like you have 6 months out movies that are booked.
Yes.
So what are some movies recently that you saw that were like, this was worth watching, this was a good one? Because I see movies maybe once every 6 months.
Yeah, actually talking about that, my girlfriend bought the tickets for Endgame on the day that they were available.
Yeah.
And bought a lot of tickets.
What is that, 2015?
It was a while ago.
Yeah.
It's too long ago to buy movie tickets, but
she's already pre-ordered her popcorn and candy and stuff beforehand too. Yeah.
Yeah, we have so many points that we could get 10 free movies. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, on the app.
Yeah. Anyway, honestly, Endgame is one of the best ones that's come out recently, in my view. I also saw Godzilla recently and Detective Pikachu before that.
The Godzilla movie was the one with that girl 11 from Stranger Things.
Yes.
And she's a little older now.
Yeah.
How did that perform? Do you think she's gonna progress into an adult actress?
I think so. They played her role well. Like she's playing like a teenager, probably like a 16-year-old.
Yeah.
And it's definitely different from her role as 11. It's Millie Bobby Brown. And she's actually a very important character in the movie. So
yeah,
it was enjoyable.
Well, good. That's always nice to see someone progress outside of childhood acting into adult acting. So hopefully that works out for her.
Yeah,
she was impressive in Stranger Things.
Yeah, which season 3 is coming out soon, and I'm
exciting.
Very excited. I love that show.
Another thing, not to get too off topic here, but I saw that new. If anyone's a Westworld fan, the new trailer came out, and I didn't know it was Westworld until they popped up Westworld season 3.
Oh,
so it was like I had no idea what it was, didn't know any of the characters, and then it pulled up, and I was shocked.
That's pretty exciting.
So that was interesting. But let's get into this topic. So, Hank, before you joined the Man Group, you were a middle school teacher.
Yes, I was.
You studied middle school education at App State.
I did.
Was that always your plan? You always knew you wanted to be a teacher?
Once I got into college, yes, there was a lot of change in high school, as most people have. There was a point where I wanted to be a chef, and then I wanted to just be a business person. And then from there, like my senior year, I decided I wanted to be a high school teacher.
And that was revolved around one teacher, correct?
Yeah, it was my AP World History teacher who I had my senior year of high school.
So but I want to frame this up for our listeners here. When I talk about teaching, I want to talk about teaching and also coaching, because that's obviously what we're here to do. That's what we tune in for, is how do we get better at teaching? How do we get better at coaching? How do we not be afraid of stepping in front of a room and commanding a room to get people to listen to you, no matter what their age?
Yeah.
And so, what was this teacher? I also had this teacher, so I'm not gonna, give my 2 cents. But what was this teacher? How was this teacher so impactful for you that you said, this is the career for me?
Well, he, for one, on the most basic level, there were a lot of people who took his class who obviously weren't history buffs, who just loved being in his class and learning from him. So he created a very engaging environment with a lot of fun activities, with a lot of involvement from the class. And it was nice. He had he always covered his board with his outline, and as we went through each topic, which was just a bullet point, he would like erase it, so you knew exactly where you were. And it was like a week-long agenda, really.
So, what were some of those activities or environment that he created? Can you break down some of those specifics?
Well, for one, he brought a lot of energy and excitement every day.
So he was just an energetic person.
Yes,
He had an energetic attitude.
Yeah, which is pretty important for high schoolers. His class was for sophomores or seniors, no one in between.
Mhm.
And so, especially for seniors who are just ready to be done, especially if they're going to college, they've already gotten into college, or they're just ready to start their work, whatever that may be. Getting those people excited to be in school is pretty
Still
important,
even if
Yeah.
it's 1 month away from graduation.
Yeah, exactly.
So what else? What else did he do?
Well, he made sure to have create an environment where people wanted to ask questions, and felt heard, by constantly asking questions of the class and making sure that everyone had the opportunity to speak.
I'm thinking of one specific example, and this is just mainly objective, or not objective, but it is he created this in his classroom, and that's his speakers.
Yes.
So go into that a little bit.
So he would always, in between classes, he would always turn on a very loud speaker playing random music throughout the hallway, and anytime you were walking past, you were trying to guess what he was listening to. Usually, it wasn't something that we knew.
Yeah, it was something like eclectic. I remember he was the first time I ever listened to the Black Keys. He played the Black Keys and just blasted them, and I, Shazammed, or was it Shazam?
Yeah, Shazam.
Yeah, Shazam the song, and I was like, oh, okay. So now, 8 years later, I'm still listening to them. So, yes. So, I recall too. He framed it up to where the environment served the class.
Yeah.
So he had flags all over his room. So it was cool because he had decorations all over his room. It wasn't just like a standard white classroom. There wasn't like just academic posters. There were flags. There was murals. There was a mural of the Earth that all the students had drawn and painted on his wall, as well as like playing throughout in one of the sections. I remember there was a group or organization called the Young Turks, and during that section he played Young Turks by Rod Stewart.
Yeah.
And so it was just like a really fun, engaging environment.
Yeah.
So anyway, this teacher created this passion in you, or instilled this passion in you that said, I can do this, or this is the way I want to teach.
Yeah, that's what I want to do.
Yeah. So you get to App State and you decide you don't want to be a middle school history teacher anymore, or a high school history teacher anymore. How did you make the transition to middle school?
It was actually just a suggestion by an advisor who said, so you've got a bunch of credits right now already for history, so you should consider switching to middle school. You'll still be teaching, and you just have to take a couple more classes.
Okay, and then they obviously don't have history classes when you're in middle school.
No.
So how do you determine what you want to teach, like social studies, science, math? Like, how do you determine that?
It really is based on what you're passionate on. For me, I was always interested in science because I really liked experiments, and then I was just interested in history because I liked cause and effect. Someone did this in this country, and that affected this group of people in this way, and I found that very intriguing. So I decided to go with history and science, which is not a common combination.
Yeah, and every time I tell people that you're a middle school teacher, they're just instant cringe of that's the worst age. Why would you teach middle schoolers? So why did you teach middle schoolers?
Well, actually, middle schoolers are really funny. It's when people first figure out sarcasm, and most middle schoolers are still interested in school. They still like their teachers and haven't given up on anything, and so they're almost still like an open book.
Yeah.
With sarcasm, and I'm a very sarcastic person, so that benefited me.
Okay. Yeah, you do have a dry sense of humor, and I think that that does fit well. So do
Yeah.
you have any like fun stories of being in middle school, or not you being in middle school, but like when you were teaching, of just something that was funny or something that was entertaining that comes to mind?
Yes, I actually started a trend. I noticed that uh, a good way to keep my students engaged was through puns.
Mm-hmm.
And so as many puns as I could make while teaching, I did. And every time I made a pun, I would slap my knee, or like either a pun or like a really bad joke. And so it got to the point where anytime any student in the 7th grade said a bad joke or a pun, they would look for me and try and slap their knee. And so it became a common thread of just you saying, some sort of bad joke or a cringeworthy joke, and then a pun, and then you're slapping your knee.
Gotcha. So you also coached soccer and track
I did.
at the middle school.
Mm-hmm.
You had some overlap between the two students you were teaching and the ones you were coaching
Yeah.
on the field. What was it like teaching the same students and then later in the afternoon coaching them? How would you determine that the difference in definition?
There's a big difference actually, because when a student's or when someone's in a classroom, they act a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Either there's one way, which is that they want to act better because they want to impress
the
someone,
opposite sex,
or just get good grades or something like that.
Yeah.
And then they cared less when they were doing the sport, or there were the kids who felt that they didn't like school, and so that when they're in a classroom they perform poorly, but they really love sports,
Mm-hmm.
and so they'd really show up well at track. And then once I was their coach, they would do better in my classroom.
They just felt more invested in you personally, not necessarily in the curriculum.
Completely, 100%. Yeah,
Do you think that's applicable to adults,
absolutely.
like the teaching versus coaching?
I think so. As long as it's
This is what I'm getting at here. Like when we're teaching, or for example, outside of what we teach, there's product knowledge, extensive product knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're in a company and you have to just know the ins and outs, objective truth of the company, of what you sell, or either your products or your process or whatever. But then when you go out and do it and perform, that becomes a different element. And so the teaching is like, you're either watching a video or having someone teach you some material. And then the coaching piece is you're going to perform. This is when it matters.
Yeah.
And that's when the whistle is blown. And I think that's a difference. Can you talk on that?
Yeah. I think when people are in a teaching circumstance on either side, it's less about direct feedback and you're worrying more about someone's feelings. Because, when you're in a classroom, it's like a grade, and that has some sort of emotion along with it. How did I do? Whereas when you're coaching, you're usually telling someone exactly what happened, because it's hard to say when someone's doing track and they run a certain time, it's hard to give them a grade. You just need to see
the time is the grade.
Yeah. So you need to you coach to what they did. You coach to, I see that your steps are irregular when you're trying to do the hurdles. And so I'm going to pay attention to how many steps you take. And then that's going to create a faster time.
Gotcha. So that leads right into the next question I wanted to ask about getting off the middle school topic is why did you stop teaching middle school?
Well, it actually, surprisingly, was not all about the kids. Middle schoolers scare a lot of people, but they were better than I could describe, really. It was more about the administration of the school. And there was not a lot of support for a new teacher, specifically around me getting in trouble because my students were acting up and I didn't really know how to fix it.
Gotcha. So what do you mean by that? Like, you felt like you didn't have the resources?
Yeah, I felt like I didn't have the resources, and more importantly, I felt like I didn't have the support from the administration, just in general. It was more about, hey, Mr. Man, I need you to come into my office. Your kids were really loud today, and they were out in the hall. So don't do that again. And I didn't feel like I knew how to fix that. I didn't know the steps to doing that.
So addressing the result, not necessarily the behavior. So
Yes.
instead of saying your kids were out in the hall, they were being too loud, stop doing that. It should have been, you need to what?
Well,
How, if you could coach the people that drove you away, what would you tell them?
number one, they should have been in my classroom for an entire class period. Being able to see exactly what I was doing and not paying attention to the students, having a principal or an assistant principal just sit in the back quietly and watch without intervening to see exactly what I was doing that was not creating the result that they wanted. And then just giving me feedback on that, instead of on that my students were loud, just saying, you need to structure your lesson in a better way. Let me help you, as opposed to just saying do better.
Gotcha. So part of it is on you to create an engaging environment.
Yeah.
Teach the curriculum effectively, making
Right.
sure all your students are passing your exams
Mhm.
or preparing your students at least to take the exams.
Yeah.
But another part is the support piece, that you feel heard and that you feel like supported, and that I need some very specific help on this specific thing,
Right.
instead of just it all fell apart and I don't know what happened.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. So let's try and take this back to adults,
Okay.
to our listeners, and because I think there are a lot of similarities here, but
Yeah.
let's talk about some of the differences first.
Okay.
Like, what are the differences between teaching middle schoolers versus teaching adults now that you've spent an extensive amount of time in front of rooms teaching adults now?
Well, in general, with students, you've got to deal more with parents. Parents have a big influence on how students behave,
Mm-hmm.
and a teacher can't really,
Like, affect their home life.
right. You can't influence that.
Just like you can't affect your employee's home life.
Right. That's true. But at least an adult can create their own mindset around the work, whereas sometimes a student may have been given a mindset, almost like a parent says school sucks,
Mhm.
or you're not good at math,
Yeah.
and then that's just what they
Or don't
live
listen
with.
to your teachers.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas most adults create their own mindset through their own experiences.
Gotcha. And
Yeah.
so what are some other differences?
In general, as long as you're giving people an engaging experience, adults are more willing to learn, depending on the adults that you're talking to, of course, and what you're teaching.
Well, but what about the idea that kids are like sponges?
Well, you have to create an engaging experience for someone to want to learn anyway.
How do you do that?
Well, you have to be excited, as we talked about with our previous teacher. You have to be excited about what you're doing, and you have to project that excitement. You can't be bummed out about what you're doing. You can't say, "I'm sorry, guys, we got to spend an hour and a half talking about doing fractions today."
Mhm.
Right? You have to be excited about it so that whoever you're talking to is excited about it. Just like in a work environment, if you're saying you have to practice learning the features of a new Patagonia jacket, you need to be excited about doing that,
Yeah.
because whoever you're talking to is going to feel that.
Gotcha. Now, what are some things that stand out that they're alike? How can we just learn how to be better at teaching people?
Well, for one, like I said before, it has to be engaging and you have to be excited. Secondly, you have to be able to allow people to move around, and get up
Interact.
frequently. And that includes a lot of things, as you just said: interact, be able to talk to each other about topics that they're thinking about, be able to talk to you as the instructor,
Yeah.
or the coach.
Something that I've learned too is not giving people answers,
Right.
especially as adults.
Yeah.
Like kids, if they're taking an exam, you can give them the cheat sheet, and then you give them a cheat sheet a week before the test or the exam, and they're just going to create either a study guide or practice those same problems or whatever, and you can create the outcome just
Yeah.
by having them memorize the correct answers. And even then some will get it wrong because they don't understand the framework.
Yeah.
But there is a dynamic of leading the room and not spoon feeding answers.
Yeah.
Like, I think standing in front of the room, especially in front of adults, there becomes this you feel this responsibility that you're responsible for what they get out of it. And really, that's not it at all. It's on them to take what they need out of it.
Yeah.
And so and that's where it's like, you have to realize with adults is that you can't assume that they want to get better at all.
Yeah, you basically give them the resources to learn, but you can't force them to learn it, right? You can't just give them what you want to hear.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's a pitfall where you brush past everything and you assume that everyone agrees with you and that they want to get better and that they want the company to make more revenue. And all of this, they want to make more apparel sales. I mentioned that on a previous podcast. Like, you can't assume someone wants to sell more apparel because they don't see the bottom line like you do if you're an owner or a manager.
Yeah, absolutely.
They don't see it in that same light of, okay, this is my livelihood, because they're clocking in the hours. They don't care.
Yeah.
They're getting, assuming hourly pay or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then another thing, as we get down to the bottom of the list here, just a practical, almost comical thing that you and I have both noticed is around food.
Yeah.
Kids and adults.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting things about food because you need to eat. You've got to eat
spikes
throughout a day. And so if you're spending a long time working with people and coaching, you have to allow people the chance to eat. But when you're doing that, you have to understand that after lunch or after a big meal, what happens?
Yeah, they're falling asleep.
Yeah. And so we even talked about that at the beginning of our podcast today.
Yeah.
Right? That it's in the afternoon, we ate, and so we might be a little groggy. So
the coffee after lunch may be a necessity depending on what, like if you're expecting or if you have a really important topic and you're scheduling that topic or that meeting, like, hey guys, come back. Once you come back from lunch, we're having a meeting today. You have to be aware that people may not be getting everything out of this meeting simply because their blood sugar is, dropping. They're just tired.
Yeah. And so you have to be able to let people move around more, talk more.
Stand up, interact.
Yeah. And just be a part of the presentation or a part of the coaching process so that they're more awake and alive.
And even setting yourself up, knowing if you have a meeting or if you have to host a meeting and you're scheduling it right after lunch, or secondly, right before lunch.
Yeah.
People are always looking at the clock. Oh man, I'm starving. I haven't eaten anything since dinner last night.
Yeah.
And I'm starving. Okay, this guy, how long is this going to take? He didn't tell me how long it's going to take. It's 11:30. I'm getting really nervous looking at the clock. And now you've lost half your audience because they can't stop thinking about food.
Yeah.
And so it's just part of being an effective, it's just a lot of times we see like these really upstanding teachers or presenters or public speakers or whatever, but they have created this environment and they know exactly, like, I don't need to schedule around lunchtime or I'm going to play some music or I'm going to break people into small groups, because sometimes the big group, that's another thing, having like a big dynamic group.
Yeah.
Some of the times people have anxiety around speaking in front of groups. And so breaking them into small, cohesive units that they feel more comfortable with can open people up, especially if you want to hear someone's perspective. Someone that's quiet or is underperforming, or you really value their opinion, break them into small groups and just hear their opinion, join their group. And I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, good. Awesome. I think this was an interesting topic because there are a lot of, oftentimes we think that, kids are kids and adults are adults, and all adults want to get better, and they all want to, they're all just part of the team. They're all high-fiving each other, ready to go. And I'm just hoping this podcast is more of an awareness of creating the environment that's best for learning is part of being a coach and part of being a leader.
Yeah, and it's avoiding the dreaded comment of like, they're an adult, they should know better, right? Everyone's continually learning. And
yeah, why didn't he clean the bathroom? He knows better. He's an adult. What did he grow up in a barn? Like, well, maybe.
Yeah,
you don't know that.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, Hank, we need to get you on more podcasts. This is,
Yeah.
I think, the second or third one you've ever been on, but I really appreciate you giving us your perspective.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Yep. Unfortunately, we don't have Dan on the podcast. He almost always promises something cool for the end of the podcast club, but maybe we can what do they give out in middle school? Do they give out
Candy,
candy?
silly, arm
Silly bands?
Yeah.
Silly bands.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. Okay. We'll decide. Send out an email if you
Yep.
really want some silly bands, and we'll decide based on popular
or
demand.
fidget spinners.
Yep. Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you next time. That's it for this episode. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave a review on our iTunes channel. We'll see you next week.